On April 7, 2022, at exactly 6:30 p.m., a phone call changed everything. Not just for one family, not just for one small town in Louisiana, but for everyone who would come to learn about what happened on North Ridge Drive that evening. This is the complete story of Ashley Fish, a 28-year-old mother of 4 whose life was taken in her own home. This is the story of the investigation that followed, the trial that sought justice, the families forever changed, and the lessons we must learn. If you watch only one video about this case, let it be this one. This is not a sensationalized retelling. This is not exploitation. This is a comprehensive documentary, factual, respectful, and complete, about a tragedy that reveals uncomfortable truths about domestic violence, about justice, and about the lives left behind. Over the next hour, we will walk through every aspect of this case, from Ashley's life before tragedy struck, to the events of that April evening, through the investigation and trial, to where everyone stands today. We'll examine the 911 call that became the centerpiece of evidence. We'll break down the legal strategies that shaped the trial. We'll explore what this case teaches us about recognizing and preventing domestic violence. But most importantly, we'll remember Ashley Fish not as a victim in a true crime story, but as a person, a mother, a daughter, someone who mattered to the people who loved her. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that this case involves real people experiencing real grief. Ashley's 4 daughters are still processing the loss of their mother. Both families continue to cope with this tragedy. This documentary is created with the utmost respect for everyone affected. We will present facts from official records, court documents, and verified sources. We will avoid speculation. We will focus on what can be learned to potentially prevent future tragedies. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out for help. The National Domestic Violence Hotline operates 24/7 at 1-800-799-7233. You can also text START to 88788 or visit thehotline.org. These services are free, confidential, and available in multiple languages. Domestic violence doesn't discriminate. It affects people of all ages, races, economic backgrounds, and education levels. And tragically, it too often ends in fatalities like the one we're about to discuss. This case matters because Ashley Fish matters. Her life mattered, her daughter's future matters, and the lessons we can learn from this tragedy matter. So let's begin at the beginning. Let's talk about who Ashley Fish was before she became a headline. Ashley Fish was born in 1994 in Louisiana. She grew up in the DeRidder area, a small town in Beauregard Parish with a population of around 10,000 people. The kind of community where neighbors know each other, where local businesses are family-owned, where everyone comes together for high school football games. DeRidder itself is a town with deep roots. Founded in the early 1900s, it grew around the timber industry and the railroad. It's the kind of place where generations of families have lived, where people know not just you, but your parents and grandparents, where community ties run deep. Ashley was part of that community fabric. She wasn't famous, she wasn't a public figure, but she was known. The kind of person who shows up, who volunteers, who makes an effort. But most importantly, Ashley was a mother. She had 4 daughters. The oldest was old enough by April 2022 to understand what was happening in her household. She could comprehend, at a child's level, that something was wrong when her mother didn't come out of that bathroom. She would be the one, ultimately, who would have to speak to police. Who would have to say those words, "My mother is in the bedroom." The second daughter was younger, but old enough to have memories that will last a lifetime. Memories of her mother, memories of that day, memories that she'll carry forward, and that will shape who she becomes. The 2 youngest daughters were very young in April 2022, still in those formative years where a mother's presence is everything, where mom is the center of the universe, where safety and security and love all come from that one person. All 4 of these girls lost that person on April 7, 2022. All 4 of them will grow up with a hole in their lives that can never be filled. All 4 of them will have to navigate childhood, adolescence, and adulthood without their mother there to guide them. According to testimony from her own mother, Sheila Krebsbach, Ashley was a devoted parent. She put her children first in every decision. She was active in their school. She was involved in their activities. She was present in their lives in the way that truly matters. Mrs. Krebsbach would later testify in court, "I never knew my daughter to be aggressive or physically violent." This characterization of Ashley as peaceful, as non-confrontational, would become important during the trial. Because in cases of domestic violence that turn fatal, there's often a question of whether the violence was mutual, whether the victim fought back, whether there was a pattern of conflict. According to everyone who knew her, Ashley was not a violent person. She was not known to be aggressive. She wasn't the type to escalate arguments into physical confrontations. She was a mother trying to raise 4 daughters and provide them with stability and love. Ashley had been in a previous relationship with a man identified in court documents as Mr. Fish. That relationship had produced her 4 daughters. At some point, that relationship ended. The specific reasons aren't detailed in the public record, and frankly, they're not particularly relevant to what happened later. What matters is that the ending was amicable enough that they maintained a co-parenting relationship. This is actually significant. Many relationships end badly. Many exes can't stand to be in the same room together. Many people struggle with co-parenting because of lingering anger or resentment from the relationship's end. But Ashley and Mr. Fish seem to have moved past whatever issues ended their romantic relationship. They were able to communicate. They were able to coordinate. They were able to put their daughters first, which is what good parents do even when relationships end. Mr. Fish remained involved in his daughters' lives. He had visitation rights. The girls would see their father regularly. This wasn't a situation where the father was absent or uninvolved. He was present. He was active in their lives. And Ashley and Mr. Fish communicated about the ordinary logistics of raising children together. Scheduling, coordination, when the kids would call him, when he would see them next. The mundane but necessary details of shared custody. On April 7, 2022, that communication was normal. At 5:50 p.m., Ashley sent Mr. Fish a text message about routine logistics. Nothing in that message suggested crisis or emergency. It was just another message in what was probably hundreds or thousands of messages they'd exchanged over the years about their daughters. This is important context because it shows that Ashley was capable of maintaining functional relationships even after romantic involvement ended. She prioritized her children's relationship with their father. She communicated. She coordinated. She did what parents are supposed to do. By all accounts, Ashley was doing the best she could as a single mother of 4. Being a single parent is challenging under the best circumstances. You're managing a household alone. You're making all the decisions alone. You're handling all the logistics, all the emotional support, all the practical needs of multiple children, often while also working and managing finances and trying to have some semblance of your own life. Ashley was navigating all of this. She was managing her household. She was raising her daughters. She was coordinating with their father. She was living a life that, from the outside, appeared stable and normal. Her mother, Sheila Krebsbach, would visit. She'd see Ashley and the girls. She'd observe how her daughter was managing motherhood. And what she saw was someone who was committed to her children, who was handling the challenges of parenting, who was doing well given the circumstances. But sometime around 2020, Ashley entered into a new relationship. This relationship would be with Tyler Derechowski, and it would ultimately lead to the tragedy we're examining today. Before we talk about that relationship in detail, we need to understand who Tyler Derechowski was, because understanding both people in this case is crucial to understanding what happened and why. Tyler Neil Derechowski was 31 years old in April 2022. Born around 1991, he grew up in the same general area of Louisiana as Ashley. According to testimony from his adoptive father, Zygmunt Derechowski, Tyler had been adopted when he was approximately 4 years old, which would have been around 1995. The circumstances of Tyler's early childhood aren't detailed in the public record. We don't know why he was placed for adoption. We don't know what his biological parents' situation was. We don't know if there was abuse, neglect, poverty, or simply an inability to care for him. Adoption circumstances vary widely. Some children are adopted because their biological parents died. Some because their parents had substance abuse issues. Some because their parents were too young or unable to care for them. Some because of abuse or neglect that resulted in the state removing them from their biological family. Whatever the reason Tyler was placed for adoption, what we do know is that Zygmunt and his wife adopted Tyler and raised him. The testimony at trial didn't suggest abuse or severe trauma in his adoptive home. By the accounts given, Tyler had a stable adoptive family. He was raised with parents who cared for him, who provided for him, who gave him a home. But having a stable home environment doesn't guarantee that someone won't commit violence later in life. This is an uncomfortable truth that we have to acknowledge. Many people who commit serious crimes come from loving families. Many people who commit domestic violence have no documented history of abuse in their own childhoods. Many people who seemed perfectly normal and well-adjusted make choices that shock everyone who knew them. Human behavior is complex. There's no simple formula where we can say that X childhood experience leads to Y adult behavior. Yes, childhood trauma can be a factor. Yes, witnessing violence can increase the likelihood of someone committing violence themselves, but it's not deterministic. Plenty of people experience trauma and never harm anyone, and plenty of people who commit violence had no obvious risk factors. The presence or absence of childhood trauma can be a factor in understanding behavior, but it doesn't excuse violence, and it doesn't create a simple cause and effect relationship where we can say definitively that something that happened when Tyler was 4 years old is why he shot Ashley Fish when he was 31. What we can say is this: by the time Tyler met Ashley around 2020, he was an adult capable of making his own choices. Whatever his background, whatever his history, whatever his experiences, he was responsible for his own actions. He had agency. He had the ability to make different choices, and he chose violence. Tyler and Ashley's relationship began around 2020. The exact circumstances of how they met aren't documented in the public record. Did they meet through mutual friends? Through work? Through social activities? We don't know. What we know is that they became romantically involved, and that at some point, Tyler moved into Ashley's home on Northridge Drive in DeRidder. This is a significant detail that's worth examining more closely. Tyler moved into Ashley's home. It was her house, her space, her children's home, the place where her 4 daughters lived and felt safe and had their routines and their lives. Tyler was the newcomer to an established family unit that included Ashley and her 4 daughters. He was entering an existing dynamic. He was becoming part of a household that had functioned without him before he arrived. This kind of situation can be complicated. When a single parent enters a new relationship and that new partner moves in, it changes the entire household dynamic. Children who are used to having their parent to themselves now have to share that attention. Routines that were established now have to accommodate another person. Space that was familiar now includes someone new. Some people navigate this transition well. They take time to build relationships with the children. They respect existing boundaries and routines. They understand that they're entering a family system and work to integrate themselves gradually and respectfully. Others struggle with it. They may resent the attention the parent gives to the children. They may try to assert authority they haven't earned. They may feel like an outsider and respond by becoming controlling or demanding. We don't know exactly how Tyler navigated this transition. What we know from testimony is that when Ashley's mother visited, she saw Tyler but didn't interact with him much. She described him as somewhat separate from the family unit. Ashley's mother, Sheila Krebsbach, testified that she found out about her daughter's relationship with Derekowski shortly before Ashley moved back to DeRidder. This suggests that Ashley may have lived somewhere else for a period, then returned to DeRidder with Tyler. Mrs. Krebsbach visited her daughter's house after Ashley and Tyler were together. She saw Tyler there, but she testified that they didn't interact much. She would visit Ashley and the girls, but Tyler remained somewhat separate. Not hostile, not overtly problematic, just separate. This dynamic, where a new partner doesn't fully integrate with the existing family, isn't necessarily unusual. Blended families and new relationships involving children can be complicated. Some people take time to warm up. Some people remain somewhat apart even when living in the same household. But it's worth noting because it suggests that Tyler's role in the household may have been somewhat undefined or unclear. He was living there. He was in a relationship with Ashley, but he wasn't necessarily fully integrated into the family unit that included 4 children and their mother. From the outside, there were no obvious red flags that anyone noticed or reported. No documented incidents of violence. No police calls to the residents for domestic disturbances. No reports from neighbors of loud arguments or physical altercations. No one came forward after Ashley's passing to say they had seen warning signs of physical abuse. Neighbors would later be interviewed as part of the investigation. Did they hear anything unusual? Did they see anything concerning? Did they witness any conflicts? The answers, apparently, were no. The house on Northridge Drive appeared quiet from the outside. Whatever was happening inside stayed inside. This doesn't mean the relationship was healthy. It doesn't mean there weren't problems. What it means is that if there were problems, they weren't visible to the outside world. They weren't documented, they weren't reported. They happened behind closed doors, in private moments, away from witnesses. This is actually quite common in domestic violence situations. Many abusive relationships appear fine from the outside. The couple seems happy in public. They don't fight in front of others. There are no visible bruises or injuries. Family members don't notice anything wrong. Friends don't see red flags. The violence happens in private, behind locked doors. In moments when no one else is watching, victims often hide injuries or explain them away. They minimize problems when asked. They maintain a facade that everything is fine. And perpetrators are often skilled at presenting a normal face to the world. They can be charming, friendly, well-liked. People often express shock when someone is arrested for domestic violence because he seemed so nice or they seemed so happy together. Experts in domestic violence recognize that the absence of visible signs doesn't mean the absence of danger. In fact, some of the most dangerous relationships are those that appear perfectly normal to everyone outside the relationship. There are often warning signs, but they're subtle. They're things that might not seem significant in isolation, but that form a pattern when seen together. Controlling behavior about what someone wears or who they talk to. Monitoring phone calls or text messages. Isolating someone from friends and family. Extreme jealousy. Quick mood swings. Blaming the victim for the abuser's emotions or actions. Did any of these signs exist in Ashley and Tyler's relationship? We don't have enough information from the public record to say definitively. What we know is that on the surface, to outside observers, the relationship didn't appear to have obvious problems. But we also know that on April 7, 2022, Tyler Derechowski shot and killed Ashley Fish. So whatever was happening in that relationship, whatever dynamics were at play, whatever stressors or conflicts existed, they culminated in fatal violence. So what do we actually know about Ashley and Tyler's relationship in the 2 years before April 2022? We know they were together for approximately 2 years. We know they lived together in Ashley's home. We know Ashley's mother visited but didn't interact much with Tyler. We know there were no documented police interventions. Beyond that, the private dynamics of their relationship remain largely unknown, except for what would be revealed in the events of April 7, 2022, which brings us to that date, April 7, 2022, a Thursday, spring in Louisiana. By all accounts, it started as an ordinary day. The weather that day in DeRidder would have been typical for early April in Louisiana. Probably mild temperatures, maybe in the 70s, the kind of day where you might have windows open, where you might hear sounds from neighboring houses, where life proceeds normally. Ashley was home with her 4 daughters. It's not entirely clear from the public record whether the girls had been at school that day or were home for some reason. What we know is that they were in the house with Ashley. Tyler was also at the house. He was present in the residence that afternoon and evening. The girls were there, going about their normal routines, homework perhaps, playing, whatever children do on a Thursday afternoon in April. It was a school day, or it had been, and now it was late afternoon, early evening, the time of day when families are transitioning from the afternoon into evening routines, when dinner needs to be prepared, when children need to be supervised, when the household is active. At 5:50 p.m., Ashley picked up her phone and sent a text message to Mr. Fish, the father of her children. The message was about routine logistics, coordinating when the girls would call him, normal co-parenting communication, the kind of message that had probably been sent hundreds of times before. The text read, "I'll have the girls call soon, trying to do dinner and stuff. I guess call when you're ready later. I'm still working on my situation here. Let's pause on this message because it would become significant in the investigation and trial. It's worth examining it carefully, word by word, to understand what it might tell us. I'll have the girls call soon." This is straightforward coordination. Mr. Fish was expecting the girls to call. Ashley is confirming that will happen. It's a promise about the immediate future. She's making plans that extend beyond this moment, trying to do dinner and stuff. This tells us what Ashley was doing at 5:50 p.m. She was preparing dinner. The word trying suggests she was in the process, maybe interrupted, maybe multitasking. And stuff is vague, the kind of shorthand people use when they're busy with multiple things and don't want to enumerate them all. I guess call when you're ready later. More scheduling coordination. She's being flexible about timing. She's accommodating Mr. Fish's schedule. This is normal co-parenting communication. But then there's that last phrase. I'm still working on my situation here. This is the phrase that stands out. The phrase that takes on weight in retrospect. The phrase that everyone would analyze afterward, trying to understand what Ashley meant. What situation? What was Ashley referring to? The prosecution would suggest during trial that this was a reference to conflict with Tyler, that there was something happening in the household that Ashley described as her situation, that at 5:50 p.m. there was already tension or conflict that Ashley was trying to manage. But we have to be careful about reading too much into a single phrase. My situation could mean many things. It could be as simple as referring to the chaos of managing dinner with 4 children. It could be a reference to trying to get the kids settled so they could call their father. It could be about household logistics or tasks she was trying to complete. Or it could be something more significant. It could be a subtle way of indicating that something was wrong. In domestic violence situations, victims sometimes develop coded language, ways of hinting at problems without stating them explicitly, ways of signaling distress without triggering a reaction from their abuser. Was my situation coded language? Was Ashley trying to signal something? We'll never know for certain because Ashley isn't here to tell us what she meant. Mr. Fish would later testify that at the time, he didn't think anything of it. The message seemed normal to him. He assumed Ashley was just dealing with the regular complexities of an evening with 4 children. He didn't sense urgency or distress. It was just another text message in their ongoing co-parenting communication. He didn't know it would be the last message he'd ever receive from her. At 5:50 p.m., Ashley Fish was alive. She was communicating normally. She was making plans for her children's evening. She was preparing dinner. She was managing her household. She was being a mom. 40 minutes later, at 6:30 p.m., Tyler Derekowski would call 911 to report that he had shot her. 40 minutes. 2,400 seconds. That's the window. That's the time frame in which everything changed. That's the period during which something escalated from whatever situation Ashley was dealing with to a fatal shooting. What happened in those 40 minutes? We can only piece together what we know from Tyler's own statements and the physical evidence found at the scene. But there are gaps, things we don't know, things that only 2 people knew, and one of them isn't here anymore. Sometime between 5:50 p.m. and approximately 6:20 p.m., according to the timeline Tyler himself provided, he shot Ashley Fish. He used a Smith & Wesson handgun that Ashley and Mr. Fish had purchased together back in 2016. This gun has its own story that's worth examining. In 2016, Ashley and Mr. Fish were still together, still in a relationship. At some point during that relationship, they made the decision to purchase a firearm for home protection. This isn't unusual, especially in rural areas like Louisiana where gun ownership is common and where many people keep firearms for protection or hunting. They purchased a Smith & Wesson handgun. They went through the legal process of buying it. It was registered. It was legal. It was supposed to keep Ashley safe. When Ashley and Mr. Fish's relationship ended, the gun stayed with Ashley. It remained in her home. She had it for protection, for security, for peace of mind. Many women living alone or as single parents keep firearms for protection. The logic is understandable. If someone breaks in, if there's a threat, you want to be able to defend yourself and your children. You want to feel safe in your own home. But the statistics on firearms in domestic violence situations are sobering. According to research, the presence of a gun in a domestic violence situation increases the risk of homicide by 500%. Women in abusive relationships where there's a gun in the home are 5 times more likely to be killed than women in abusive relationships without guns present. This doesn't mean that women shouldn't be able to own firearms. It means that firearms in homes where there's domestic violence become a significant danger factor. And tragically, guns purchased for protection are often used against the very people they were meant to protect. In Ashley's case, the gun she and Mr. Fish purchased together for protection would be used against her. Tyler accessed that weapon. At some point during those 40 minutes between Ashley's text message and his 911 call, Tyler made the decision to use it. We don't know exactly when or where in the house Tyler retrieved the gun. We don't know if Ashley saw him get it. We don't know if words were exchanged. We don't know if there was an argument or if the violence erupted suddenly without warning. What we know is that at some point Tyler shot Ashley. According to his own statement to the 911 dispatcher, the shooting occurred approximately 10 minutes before he called at 6:30 p.m. If that timeline is accurate, the shooting took place at approximately 6:20 p.m. That would mean there was a 30-minute gap between Ashley's text message at 5:50 p.m. and the shooting at 6:20 p.m. 30 minutes during which something happened. 30 minutes of escalation. 30 minutes that we can't fully reconstruct because the only 2 people who know what really happened were Ashley and Tyler, and Ashley isn't here to tell her side of the story. Did Tyler make a decision at some point during those 30 minutes that he was going to hurt Ashley? Did something specific trigger the violence? Was there an argument that escalated? Or did Tyler just suddenly act without warning? We'll never know the complete truth of those 30 minutes. What we do know is what happened after the shooting, because Tyler himself documented it through his own actions and through what he told the 911 dispatcher. After shooting Ashley, Tyler made a series of choices. These choices are critically important because they speak to his state of mind. They speak to whether this was an impulsive act that he immediately regretted or whether it was something more calculated. The first choice Tyler made was not to call for help immediately. He didn't pick up the phone right away and dial 911. He didn't rush to check on Ashley's condition. He didn't attempt to render first aid. He didn't try to save her life. Instead, according to the evidence and his own statements, Tyler did several other things first. He secured the location where Ashley had been shot. The master bathroom where she was found would have a locked door. Whether Tyler locked it after the shooting or whether it was already locked isn't entirely clear from the public documents, but the door was secured. Why lock the door? If you've just shot someone and you're in a panic, why would you take the time to lock a door? The prosecution would argue at trial that this was a deliberate action to prevent the children from immediately discovering their mother, that it shows presence of mind and conscious decision-making. Tyler also unloaded the weapon. He removed the magazine from the Smith & Wesson. He made the gun safe. This is a detail that would become highly significant at trial because it demonstrates a level of presence of mind that seems inconsistent with someone in a blind panic. Think about what this action requires. You have to know how to safely unload a firearm. You have to remember to do it. You have to have the coordination and calm to actually perform the action correctly. You have to be thinking clearly enough to make the weapon safe. If you're in a state of extreme emotional distress, if you're panicking, if you've just done something in a moment of rage that you immediately regret, are you thinking about firearm safety? Are you remembering to eject the magazine? The prosecution would argue that this action shows Tyler was in control, that he was making deliberate choices, that he wasn't overwhelmed by emotion or panic, that he knew exactly what he was doing. Then Tyler left the house. He didn't stay with Ashley. He didn't remain at the scene. He physically departed from the residence on North Ridge Drive and traveled to another location. The exact location where Tyler went isn't specified in the public documents, but what's clear is that he left the scene. This is another significant choice. Why leave? If you've just shot someone in what might have been an accident or a moment of panic, wouldn't you stay? Wouldn't you be frozen in shock? Wouldn't you be trying to process what just happened? But Tyler left. He left the house. He left Ashley. And critically, he left 4 children in that house. 4 young girls who had just experienced or were in the process of experiencing something no child should ever have to witness. Those children were alone with their mother, who had been fatally shot and was either deceased or dying in the bathroom. They were alone in a house where violence had just occurred. They were alone without any adult to help them, protect them, or explain what was happening. Tyler acknowledged their presence when he would later call 911. He told the dispatcher, "There are kids at the house that need someone with them." He was aware they were there. He was aware they needed help. He knew they were alone, but he had left them anyway. Try to imagine what those children experienced. The oldest daughter, who was old enough to understand that something was very wrong, who might have heard raised voices or sounds that frightened her, who knew her mother was in the bathroom and wouldn't come out, who had to manage her own fear while also trying to comfort her younger sisters. The younger daughters, who didn't fully understand what was happening but knew something was wrong, who wanted their mother, who were scared, who needed comfort and safety and explanations that weren't coming. All 4 of them, alone in that house, with no idea what to do or what would happen next, just waiting, just scared, just wanting their mom. How long were they alone? Based on the timeline, it appears that Tyler left sometime shortly after the shooting at approximately 6:20 p.m. and called 911 at 6:30 p.m. Police arrived within minutes of the call, so the children were alone for somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes. Possibly longer if Tyler left immediately after the shooting. 10 to 20 minutes might not seem like a long time, but imagine being a child in that situation. Every minute would feel like an eternity. Every sound would be frightening. Every moment without mom would be terrifying. At 6:30 p.m., Tyler Derikowski placed a call to the DeRidder Police Department, but he didn't call from the house. He called from wherever he had gone, which means there was distance between him and the scene, which means he had time during his travel to think about what he'd done and what he would do next. The call was answered by Officer Gladys Santiago, a trained 911 dispatcher with years of experience handling emergency calls. Officer Santiago has heard thousands of calls during her career. Calls from people in medical emergency, calls from people reporting crimes, calls from people in all kinds of crisis situations. But this call would be different. This call would be a calm, clear confession to murder. And Officer Santiago would have to handle it professionally, while also gathering the information needed to dispatch appropriate resources and potentially save a life if there was any chance Ashley Fish could still be helped. The call began with Tyler stating, "I need to turn myself in. I just committed a crime." Think about that opening. Not, "Help, something terrible happened." Not, "I need an ambulance." Not, "Please send someone." He said, "I need to turn myself in." That phrase shows legal awareness. It shows understanding that what he'd done constitutes a crime. It shows that he's already thinking about arrest, about consequences, about the legal process. This isn't someone in a panicked emotional state. This is someone making a calculated statement. Officer Santiago, following her training and protocols, asked what crime he had committed. She needed to know what kind of response to send, what resources would be needed, how to prioritize this call among whatever else was happening in the system at that moment. Tyler responded, "I shot my girlfriend. I think she's dead." Let's pause here again on those words because they're critically important. I shot my girlfriend. I think she's dead. The phrase "I shot" is active voice. It's an admission of action. It's Tyler acknowledging that he was the one who pulled the trigger. He's not saying she was shot or there was a shooting. He's saying, "I shot her." And then, "I think she's dead." Not, "She might be hurt." Not, "I don't know if she's okay." Not, "I need an ambulance." He thinks she's dead. But how does he know? Did he check? Did he verify? Or is he inferring based on what he did to her? Officer Santiago immediately asked the critical question, did he need medical assistance? This is standard 911 protocol, and it's vitally important. Even if someone appears to be deceased, even if the caller thinks the person is deceased, emergency medical services should still be dispatched. There's always a possibility, even if remote, of life-saving intervention. Minutes matter. CPR matters. Emergency medical response matters. Tyler's response was just one word. No. Just no. No request for an ambulance. No concern about whether Ashley might still be saved. No urgency about getting medical help to the scene as quickly as possible. Just no. This single word would become one of the most damning pieces of evidence at trial, because it demonstrates that Tyler was not concerned about Ashley's survival. He had already determined in his mind that she was deceased, and he made no effort to ensure she received medical attention that might have saved her life. Officer Santiago began gathering additional information. She obtained the address, North Ridge Drive in DeRidder. She immediately dispatched Officer Cameron Smith and Corporal Joshua Stanford to the residence. These officers would be driving Code 3, lights and sirens, racing to the scene as quickly as possible. But Officer Santiago didn't hang up. She kept Tyler on the line. This is standard 911 protocol for several critical reasons. First, it prevents the caller from fleeing. As long as Tyler was talking to Officer Santiago, he wasn't running. He wasn't destroying evidence. He wasn't creating additional problems. He was remaining on the line, which meant police could track his location and make contact with him. Second, it allows the dispatcher to gather additional information that might be crucial for the responding officers. Every detail Tyler provided would help police know what they were walking into. Was there a weapon? Where was it? Were there other people in the house? Was there ongoing danger? Third, it creates a recorded statement. Everything Tyler said on this call was being recorded. It could be used as evidence. It would become part of the official record of the case. And in situations where someone confesses to a crime, that recorded confession is incredibly valuable evidence. During the call, Tyler provided numerous specific details about what had happened and the current state of affairs. Each of these details would later be examined, analyzed, and used as evidence at trial. He told Officer Santiago that he had left the gun at the house. This told responding officers that there was a weapon on scene, but that Tyler didn't currently have it. This was important safety information. He identified the victim as Ashley Fish, his girlfriend of 2 years. This provided identification and established the relationship between the caller and the victim. He stated that there were children in the house who needed someone with them. This was critical information that changed the entire response. This wasn't just a shooting. There were children present who needed immediate assistance and protection. He said the shooting had occurred about 10 minutes ago. This established a rough timeline and suggested that if Ashley was still alive, time was of the essence for medical intervention. He said Ashley wasn't breathing when he left. This was significant because it provided information about her condition, but it also raised questions. How did he know she wasn't breathing? Did he check? Or was he assuming based on what he'd done? Officer Santiago asked for clarification. Did you check on her? Tyler's response, no, I didn't check on her, but I think she's dead. This is a remarkable admission. He's stating explicitly that he did not verify Ashley's condition. He didn't check for a pulse. He didn't attempt CPR. He didn't try to help her in any way. He simply assumed she was deceased and acted on that assumption by leaving. At trial, the prosecution would argue that this demonstrates specific intent. Tyler shot Ashley with the intent to cause her death. He believed he had succeeded in that intent, and he left without attempting to render aid because saving her life was not his goal. He also told Officer Santiago where Ashley was located. She's in the bathroom. The bathroom door is locked. The bathroom. And the door was locked. These details matched what police would find when they arrived. Everything Tyler was saying was accurate. He wasn't trying to mislead or confuse the investigation. He was providing clear, accurate information about what had happened and where evidence would be found. Why was the door locked? This would become a point of analysis. Did Tyler lock the door after shooting Ashley? Was the door locked during whatever confrontation or argument preceded the shooting? The exact sequence isn't entirely clear, but what is clear is that the door was secured, which prevented immediate access to Ashley. Officer Santiago asked about the weapon again, wanting to confirm its status for officer safety. Tyler provided another critical detail. I unloaded the clip. The gun is in the house. I unloaded the clip. This statement would become one of the most analyzed pieces of the entire 911 call, because it demonstrates such a specific level of presence of mind and deliberate action. Unloading a firearm requires several steps. You have to locate the magazine release, you have to press it correctly, you have to ensure the magazine is fully removed. You have to do this while maintaining control of the weapon. It's not complicated if you know what you're doing, but it does require conscious thought and coordinated action. If you're in a state of extreme panic or emotional overwhelm, if you've just done something in a blind rage that you immediately regret, are you thinking about firearm safety protocols? Are you remembering to eject the magazine? Are you performing the mechanical steps correctly? The prosecution would argue that this action proves Tyler was calm, collected, and in control of his faculties, that he was making deliberate choices, that he had the presence of mind to remember and execute a safety procedure, that this wasn't someone acting in a moment of uncontrolled emotion. The defense would later argue that people respond to trauma in different ways, that someone could be in shock and still perform automatic actions, that the act of unloading the weapon might have been almost reflexive, something Tyler did without conscious thought because he'd been trained in firearm safety. But the jury would have to decide, does unloading the weapon prove presence of mind? Does it prove that Tyler wasn't overcome by emotion? Does it support the prosecution's theory that he acted with specific intent? The 911 call continued for a total of 11 minutes and 34 seconds. During that time, Tyler answered Officer Santiago's questions. He provided additional details as needed. He remained on the line until officers made contact with him at his location. And throughout the entire call, his voice remained calm. His tone was steady. He didn't cry. He didn't hyperventilate. He didn't exhibit the kind of extreme emotional distress that Officer Santiago typically heard in calls where someone was reporting a tragedy. Officer Santiago would later testify about this at trial. When asked to describe the caller's demeanor, she explained that he was calm, that he answered questions directly, that he provided clear information, that he didn't show signs of the kind of emotional overwhelm she usually heard in emergency situations. The defense would cross-examine her on this point. Are you a psychologist? Can you really determine someone's mental state from their voice? Isn't it possible that someone in shock might sound calm even though internally they're experiencing extreme distress? Officer Santiago acknowledged that she wasn't qualified to make psychological diagnoses. She was simply describing what she heard, but the jury would have the opportunity to listen to the recording themselves. They could form their own impressions about what Tyler's tone revealed. While Tyler was still on the phone with Officer Santiago, events were unfolding at the house on North Ridge Drive. Corporal Joshua Stanford arrived first, pulling up to the residence at approximately 6:35 p.m. That's just 5 minutes after the 911 call began. Response time in a small town like DeRidder can be very fast because distances are short and there's usually not heavy traffic to navigate. Corporal Stanford would have been approaching this scene with extreme caution. He knew from dispatch that there had been a shooting. He knew the caller had admitted to shooting his girlfriend. He knew there were children in the house. He knew there was a weapon on scene, though the caller had said he'd left it there. Even though the caller had said he'd left and was turning himself in, Corporal Stanford couldn't assume the scene was safe. Police officers responding to violent incidents have to be prepared for anything. The information they receive is only as good as what the caller provides, and situations can change rapidly. Corporal Stanford approached the front door of the residence, and before he could knock or announce his presence, the door opened. Ashley's oldest daughter stood there, a child, looking up at a uniformed police officer. A child who had just experienced something no child should ever have to experience. A child who somehow understood that police had arrived and that she needed to open the door. Imagine being Corporal Stanford in that moment. You're responding to a shooting. You're expecting chaos, danger, uncertainty, and instead a child opens the door. A child who needs help. A child who's been through trauma. A child who's looking to you for protection and answers. The girl said to Corporal Stanford, "My mother is in the bedroom." Those 6 words, spoken by a child, directing a police officer to where her mother's body would be found. Can you imagine having to say those words? Can you imagine being old enough to understand that something terrible had happened to your mom, but young enough that you're not sure exactly what or why or what will happen next? Can you imagine the weight of those words? The responsibility that child felt? The fear and confusion and grief all mixed together? Corporal Stanford would have immediately shifted into a different mode. This wasn't just a shooting scene. There were traumatized children who needed immediate care and protection. The response now had to include child protective services, family services, counseling resources. These children had just lost their mother and witnessed or experienced severe trauma. But first, Corporal Stanford had to secure the scene and locate the victim. He entered the house, still maintaining vigilance in case the situation wasn't what he'd been told. He would have been assessing as he moved through the residence, looking for threats, looking for other victims, making sure the environment was safe. He made his way to the master bedroom as the child had indicated. There was a bathroom attached to the bedroom. The door was closed and locked, exactly as Tyler had told Officer Santiago it would be. Corporal Stanford would have had to make a quick decision. Force the door immediately? Look for a key? Time was potentially critical if there was any chance Ashley was still alive. Every second mattered. He gained entry to the bathroom. The specific method isn't detailed in public documents, but he got the door open. And he found Ashley Fish. She was in the bathroom where Tyler said she would be. She had sustained fatal injuries exactly as Tyler had described. Everything Tyler had told Officer Santiago was accurate. Corporal Stanford would immediately have checked for vital signs, for any indication of life, for any possibility that emergency medical intervention could help. He would have looked for breathing, for a pulse, for any sign that Ashley was still alive. But Ashley had been deceased since the shooting approximately 15 to 20 minutes earlier. There was nothing that could be done. No amount of medical intervention could help her now. The responding officers had arrived as quickly as humanly possible, but they were too late. Ashley Fish was gone. Corporal Stanford immediately secured the bathroom as a crime scene. This area now had to be preserved. Nothing could be touched or moved. Everything had to be documented exactly as it was found. Photographs would need to be taken. Evidence would need to be collected. This was now an active homicide investigation. He radioed for additional units, for detectives, for the crime scene investigation team, for the coroner, and he ensured that the 4 children in the house were safe and separated from the scene. Those 4 daughters, still in the house, still scared, still confused, still wanting their mother. Officers would have had to care for them immediately, keep them away from the scene, try to comfort them, explain in age-appropriate terms what was happening, contact family members who could come get them. Meanwhile, Officer Smith had made contact with Tyler Derekowski at the location where he'd been waiting. Tyler had stayed on the line with Officer Santiago until police arrived. He offered no resistance when Officer Smith approached. He'd been expecting police. He'd called them himself. Officer Smith placed Tyler under arrest. He read him his Miranda rights, informing him of his right to remain silent, his right to an attorney, and that anything he said could be used against him in court. Tyler acknowledged that he understood these rights. He was transported to the Beauregard Parish Sheriff's Office for questioning. He'd already provided a confession on the 911 call, but investigators needed more information. They needed to understand the full context of what had happened. They needed to determine if there were any additional facts that might be relevant. Back at the scene on Northridge Drive, the investigation was beginning in earnest. This would be a methodical, thorough process that would take hours and extend over days, as all evidence was collected and analyzed. Crime scene technicians arrived and began photographing everything, every angle, every room, every piece of potential evidence, creating a comprehensive visual record of exactly how the scene appeared when police arrived. They documented the bathroom where Ashley was found. They photographed her position. They documented the locked door. They photographed the weapon Tyler had mentioned. They verified that the magazine had been removed, exactly as he'd stated in the 911 call. They collected the weapon as evidence. They collected the magazine. They collected any ammunition that was present. They would later test the weapon to confirm it was the one used in the shooting. They would analyze it for fingerprints and any other forensic evidence. They searched the entire house for any additional evidence. They were looking for anything that might be relevant to understanding what had happened. Phone records would be obtained. Text messages would be reviewed. A complete timeline would be constructed. They interviewed the 4 daughters, as gently as possible given the circumstances and their ages. These interviews would have been conducted by specially trained officers who know how to talk to traumatized children. The interviews would have been age-appropriate, careful, designed to gather information without re-traumatizing the children more than absolutely necessary. What did the children see? What did they hear? What could they tell investigators about what had happened? The answers to these questions would become part of the investigation, though the specifics would be kept confidential to protect the children. They spoke with neighbors. Did anyone hear anything unusual? Any gunshots? Any arguing? Any sounds of distress? The answers apparently were largely negative. Neighbors hadn't heard or seen anything that stood out. Whatever happened inside that house on April 7th hadn't been audible to those nearby. They collected phone records. They analyzed the text message Ashley had sent to Mr. Fish at 5:50 p.m. That message, particularly the phrase, "I'm still working on my situation here," would be examined for what it might reveal about Ashley's state of mind and what might have been happening in the house at that time. They reconstructed the timeline as completely as possible. 5:50 p.m., Ashley sends a text message. Somewhere between 5:50 p.m. and 6:20 p.m., something escalates. Approximately 6:20 p.m., Tyler shoots Ashley. 6:30 p.m., Tyler calls 911. 6:35 p.m., police arrive on scene. 6:40 p.m. or so, Tyler is taken into custody. The investigation was comprehensive and professional. Beauregard Parish Sheriff's Office, while a small department compared to major city police forces, conducted a thorough, by-the-book investigation. They collected evidence properly. They documented everything. They followed appropriate procedures. They built a solid case. Tyler was taken to the sheriff's office and placed in an interview room. Detectives would speak with him, asking him to explain what had happened, to provide more details than what he'd said on the 911 call, to help them understand the full context of the events. The specifics of Tyler's interview with detectives haven't been fully released to the public. Some details came out at trial, but the complete interview remains largely confidential. What we know is that Tyler didn't recant his confession. He didn't claim it was an accident. He didn't claim self-defense. He didn't provide an alternative explanation that would exonerate him. He maintained, essentially, what he had stated on the 911 call, that he had shot Ashley Fish, that she had lost her life as a result. He was cooperative with investigators in terms of answering questions, but he didn't provide information that helped his case. Based on his confession, the physical evidence at the scene, and the investigation findings, Tyler Derechowski was formally charged with second-degree murder. In Louisiana, second-degree murder is a specific crime with specific elements that must be proven. It's defined as the killing of a human being when the offender has specific intent to kill or to inflict great bodily harm. The key phrase there is specific intent. Specific intent is different from general intent. It means the offender consciously desired to bring about a particular result. Not just that they took an action that could have a certain result, but that they specifically intended that result. This is distinguished from first-degree murder, which in Louisiana requires additional aggravating factors. First-degree murder might involve premeditation, or the killing occurring during certain other felonies like robbery or kidnapping. First-degree murder carries the possibility of the death penalty. Second-degree murder doesn't require premeditation in the same way first-degree does, but it does require specific intent. And the penalty for second-degree murder in Louisiana is mandatory. Life in prison at hard labor without the possibility of parole, probation, or suspension of sentence. This means that if Tyler was convicted of second-degree murder, there would be no sentencing hearing where the defense could argue for leniency. There would be no possibility of a lighter sentence. The law specifies exactly what the sentence must be, and the judge has no discretion to impose anything else. For Tyler, this meant the stakes couldn't be higher. If convicted, he would spend the rest of his life in prison. He would never be eligible for parole. He would never walk free again. His only options were to fight the charge at trial or to plead guilty and accept life in prison. He chose to fight. Tyler was held without bond in Vernon Parish Jail. The Beauregard Parish Jail was closed at that time for renovations or other reasons, so individuals charged with serious crimes were housed in Vernon Parish. Tyler would remain there for nearly 2 years as the case proceeded through the legal system. The legal process in Louisiana, like in most states, involves numerous steps before a case actually goes to trial. There's the arraignment, where the defendant is formally charged and enters a plea. Tyler would have entered a plea of not guilty, meaning the case would proceed to trial. There are preliminary hearings where the prosecution has to demonstrate that there's probable cause to believe a crime was committed and that the defendant committed it. Given Tyler's confession on the 911 call, establishing probable cause wasn't difficult. There are motions filed by both sides. The defense might file motions to suppress evidence, arguing that certain evidence shouldn't be allowed at trial. They might file motions to dismiss charges, arguing that the evidence doesn't support the specific charge. They might file motions for change of venue, arguing that pretrial publicity makes it impossible to get a fair trial in the local area. The prosecution provides discovery to the defense. This means sharing all the evidence they plan to present at trial. The 911 call recording, police reports, forensic evidence, witness statements, autopsy reports, everything. The defense has a right to see all of this evidence so they can prepare their case. The defense also conducts their own investigation. They might interview witnesses. They might hire their own experts to review forensic evidence. They might gather information about Tyler's background and mental state. They're building their defense strategy. Both sides are also evaluating whether there's any possibility of a plea deal. In some cases, defendants will plead guilty to a lesser charge to avoid the risk of a trial and a more serious conviction. But in Tyler's case, given the mandatory life sentence for second-degree murder, there wasn't much room for negotiation. The prosecution wasn't offering a deal that would result in anything less than a life sentence because they believed they had a strong case for second-degree murder. And Tyler's defense team apparently believed they had grounds to fight the charge, presumably focusing on the question of whether specific intent could be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. So the case proceeded toward trial. Months passed. 2022 turned into 2023. The legal wheels turned slowly as both sides prepared. During this time, Ashley's family was grieving and trying to process their loss. Ashley's 4 daughters were placed in the care of family members. The exact arrangement isn't specified in public records to protect the children's privacy, but they were cared for by people who loved them. Those girls needed immediate trauma counseling. They needed stability. They needed people who could help them begin to process what had happened. Losing a parent is devastating for a child under any circumstances, but losing a parent to violence, especially when you were in the house when it happened, creates a particular kind of trauma. Children who witness or experience violence can develop post-traumatic stress disorder. They can have nightmares. They can have difficulty sleeping. They can become hypervigilant, constantly scanning for danger. They can have trouble trusting adults. They can struggle with feelings of guilt or responsibility, even though what happened wasn't their fault. These 4 daughters would need years of support to help them heal from what they experienced on April 7, 2022. They would need therapy. They would need patient, loving caregivers who understood trauma. They would need stability and routine to help them feel safe again. And they would need to know that their mother's death wasn't their fault, that there was nothing they could have done, that they were loved and would be cared for. Ashley's mother, Sheila Krebsbach, had lost her daughter. She had to plan a funeral for a child, which no parent should ever have to do. She had to help her granddaughters understand why their mother wasn't coming back. She had to cope with her own grief while also being strong for the children. The extended family rallied around the daughters, providing love and support. But nothing could fill the hole left by Ashley's absence. Nothing could bring her back. No amount of love from grandparents or aunts or uncles could replace their mother. Tyler's family also faced their own challenges. His adoptive father, Zygmunt Darachowski, had raised Tyler from age 4. He thought he knew his son, and now he had to reconcile the person he thought he knew with what Tyler had done. Tyler's family would have questions. How did this happen? Why did this happen? Were there signs they missed? Could they have done something to prevent this? These are questions that families of people who commit serious crimes often grapple with, and there are rarely satisfying answers. The community of DeRidder also had to process what had happened. In small towns, tragedies like this affect everyone. People knew Ashley or knew of her. People knew the family. The daughters went to school with other children in the community. It touches everyone. There would be vigils, memorials, expressions of support for the family. There would be conversations about domestic violence, about warning signs, about how such a thing could happen in their community. And throughout all of this, the legal case continued to move forward. Finally, in early 2024, a trial date was set. Nearly 2 years after Ashley's death, Tyler Derechowski would face a jury of his peers in Beauregard Parish. The trial would take place in March 2024. Jury selection would begin the process. This phase, called voir dire, is critically important in any criminal case. Both the prosecution and defense want jurors who will be fair and impartial, but they also want jurors who might be sympathetic to their side. In Louisiana, a jury in a felony case consists of 12 people. In a case involving a possible life sentence, the verdict must be unanimous. All 12 jurors must agree on guilt or innocence. If even one juror has reasonable doubt, they cannot convict. During voir dire, potential jurors are questioned by both the prosecution and the defense. They're asked about their backgrounds, their beliefs about the criminal justice system, their experiences with crime or violence, their ability to be fair and impartial. The attorneys are trying to identify jurors who will be favorable to their case and to exclude jurors who might be biased against them. There are two types of challenges they can use to exclude potential jurors. Challenges for cause require a valid legal reason. For example, if a potential juror says they could never convict anyone of murder under any circumstances, the prosecution could challenge them for cause. If a potential juror is related to one of the parties, either side could challenge for cause. These challenges are unlimited. Peremptory challenges allow attorneys to exclude a certain number of jurors without giving a reason. The prosecution gets a certain number of peremptory challenges, and the defense gets a certain number. They can use these to exclude jurors who they think might not be favorable, even if there's no legal basis to challenge them for cause. In Tyler's trial, both sides would have been looking for specific things in potential jurors. The prosecution wanted jurors who would take domestic violence seriously, who wouldn't minimize what happened just because the victim and perpetrator were in a relationship, who would understand that specific intent could be proven through conduct after the act, not just the moment of the act itself. The defense wanted jurors who would carefully consider the burden of proof, who understood that beyond a reasonable doubt is a high standard, who wouldn't be swayed purely by emotion or sympathy for the victim, who would focus on the legal question of whether specific intent had truly been proven. The process of jury selection can take hours or even days. Potential jurors are brought in groups. They're questioned individually or in panels. Some are dismissed for cause. Others are struck by peremptory challenges. Gradually, 12 jurors and several alternates are selected. These 12 people would determine Tyler Derechowski's fate. They would hear all the evidence. They would listen to all the testimony. They would evaluate the credibility of witnesses. They would deliberate together. And ultimately, they would decide, did the prosecution prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Tyler Derechowski committed second-degree murder? Once the jury was seated and sworn in, the trial proper could begin. The first phase would be opening statements. Opening statements are not evidence. They're roadmaps. Each side gets to present their theory of the case to the jury, to explain what they believe the evidence will show, to frame the narrative that they want the jury to follow. The prosecution went first, as they always do. The prosecutor stood before the jury and began to lay out the case against Tyler Derechowski. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the case we're presenting today is about choices. On April 7, 2022, Tyler Derechowski made a series of choices. He chose to pick up a weapon. He chose to use that weapon against Ashley Fish. He chose to leave her without attempting to get help. He chose to leave 4 children alone in that house with their mother who had just been shot. The prosecutor walked the jury through the basic facts of the case. Ashley Fish, 28 years old, mother of 4 daughters living in DeRidder. Tyler Derechowski, her boyfriend of 2 years living in her home. On the evening of April 7th at 5:50 p.m., Ashley sent a text message to the father of her children, a normal message about coordinating their evening. That was the last communication anyone outside that house had with Ashley Fish. 40 minutes later, Tyler Derechowski called 911, and on that call, which you will hear, he admitted to shooting Ashley. He said, "I think she's dead." He said he hadn't checked on her. He said there were children in the house who needed someone with them. The prosecutor explained that when police arrived, they found everything exactly as Tyler had described. Ashley was in the bathroom where he said she'd be. The door was locked as he said it would be. The weapon was there, with the magazine removed, exactly as he described. The evidence in this case is overwhelming, the prosecutor told the jury. Tyler Derechowski confessed. The physical evidence supports his confession. The question isn't whether he shot Ashley Fish, he admits that. The question is, did he have specific intent? Did he consciously desire to bring about her death, or to cause her great bodily harm? And the answer, the prosecutor argued, is clearly yes. Look at his actions. After shooting Ashley, he didn't panic. He didn't immediately call for help. He didn't try to save her life. Instead, he unloaded the weapon. He secured the scene. He left the house. He drove to another location, and then he called 911. These are deliberate choices, the prosecutor emphasized. These are the actions of someone who knew exactly what he'd done and who showed no concern for whether Ashley could be saved. When he called 911, Tyler didn't ask for an ambulance. He didn't request medical help. He said he needed to turn himself in. He said he thought Ashley was dead. And when asked if he'd checked on her, he admitted he hadn't. All of this demonstrates specific intent, the prosecutor argued. Tyler shot Ashley with the intent to cause her death. He believed he had succeeded, and he left without helping her because saving her life was not his goal. The prosecutor told the jury about the witnesses they would hear from. Officer Gladys Santiago, who took the 911 call. Corporal Joshua Stanford, who responded to the scene. Forensic experts who would explain the evidence. Medical examiners who determined Ashley's cause of death. Ashley's mother, who would tell them about who Ashley was as a person. The evidence will paint a clear picture, the prosecutor concluded. Tyler Derechowski shot Ashley Fish with specific intent. He knew what he was doing. He intended the result. And you must hold him accountable by finding him guilty of second-degree murder. The prosecutor sat down. Now it was the defense's turn. The defense attorney stood and addressed the jury with a different message. Ladies and gentlemen, you just heard the prosecution tell you that this is a clear case, that the evidence obviously proves specific intent, that you must find Tyler guilty. But that's not how our justice system works. In America, we have a fundamental principle: innocent until proven guilty. The burden of proof is on the prosecution. They must prove every single element of the crime beyond a reasonable doubt. And if they fail to do that, you must find Tyler not guilty. The defense acknowledged the basic facts. Yes, Tyler shot Ashley Fish. Yes, Ashley died as a result. Yes, Tyler called 911 and admitted what he'd done. None of that is in dispute. But the question before you, the defense emphasized, is very specific. Did Tyler have the specific intent required for second-degree murder? Did he consciously desire to bring about Ashley's death or to cause her great bodily harm? And on that question, the defense argued, there is reasonable doubt. Intent is internal. It's what's happening in someone's mind at a specific moment. And proving what someone was thinking, what they intended, is extraordinarily difficult. The prosecution can't get inside Tyler's head. They can only infer intent from external actions. The prosecution wants you to look at what Tyler did after the shooting and conclude that he must have had specific intent before and during the shooting. But that's not necessarily a logical conclusion. People respond to trauma and crisis in many different ways. Someone who's in shock might sound calm on a phone call. Someone who's dissociating might take actions that seem calculated, but are actually automatic responses to extreme stress. Someone who's overwhelmed might do things that don't make sense to outside observers. The defense reminded the jury that specific intent is a high legal standard. It's not enough for the prosecution to show that Tyler should have known his actions would cause Ashley's death. They have to prove that he consciously desired that result. Can they really prove that beyond a reasonable doubt? The defense asked. Can they prove what was in Tyler's mind at the moment he pulled the trigger? This is a tragedy, the defense acknowledged. Ashley Fish's death is a terrible loss. Her daughters growing up without their mother is heartbreaking. No one disputes that. But your job as jurors isn't to punish Tyler for that tragedy. Your job is to determine whether the prosecution has proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt. And if you find that they haven't, if you find that there's reasonable doubt about specific intent, then you must follow the law and return a not guilty verdict. The defense sat down. Opening statements were complete. Both sides had presented their theories of the case. The prosecution argued that the evidence clearly showed specific intent. The defense argued that reasonable doubt existed. Now it was time for the evidence phase of the trial. This is where both sides would present witnesses, introduce physical evidence, and build their cases. The prosecution called their first witness, Officer Gladys Santiago, the 911 dispatcher who took Tyler's call on April 7, 2022. Officer Santiago took the stand. She was sworn in, promising to tell the truth. The prosecutor began the direct examination. The prosecutor asked Officer Santiago to describe her role and training. She explained that she's a 911 dispatcher for the DeRidder Police Department. She's trained in emergency call handling protocols. She's handled thousands of calls during her career, everything from medical emergencies to reports of crimes to crisis situations. The prosecutor asked her about the call she received on the evening of April 7, 2022, at approximately 6:30 p.m. Officer Santiago described the call. A male caller identified himself. He stated that he needed to turn himself in because he had committed a crime. When asked what crime, he said he had shot his girlfriend and thought she was deceased. The prosecutor asked, did he request medical assistance for the victim? Officer Santiago: no, he did not. Did he ask for an ambulance to be sent to the scene? No. Did he express concern about whether the victim might still be alive? No. He stated that he thought she was dead, but he also admitted he hadn't checked on her. The prosecutor then played the 911 call recording for the jury. This was a critical moment in the trial. The courtroom fell silent as everyone listened to Tyler Derechowski's voice. I need to turn myself in. I just committed a crime. I shot my girlfriend. I think she's dead. I didn't check on her, but I think she's dead. I unloaded the clip. There are kids at the house that need someone with them. The recording played in its entirety. 11 minutes and 34 seconds of Tyler providing details about what he'd done. His voice calm throughout. His responses clear and direct. No emotional breakdown, no crying, no panic. When the recording finished, the prosecutor asked Officer Santiago about her observations during the call. How would you describe the caller's demeanor? Officer Santiago explained that the caller was calm. He answered questions directly and clearly. He provided specific information about what had happened and where evidence would be found. He didn't exhibit the kind of extreme emotional distress that she typically heard in emergency calls. In your experience as a 911 dispatcher, is this typical for someone who has just been involved in a shooting? The defense objected to this question, arguing that Officer Santiago wasn't qualified to make comparisons or draw conclusions about what's typical. The judge sustained the objection. Officer Santiago couldn't testify about what's typical, only about what she observed in this specific call. The prosecutor moved on. Based on what you heard in the call, did the caller seem concerned about whether the victim could be saved? Officer Santiago said that he didn't request medical assistance and didn't express urgency about getting help to the victim. He said he thought she was dead and that he hadn't checked on her. The prosecutor thanked Officer Santiago and turned her over for cross-examination. The defense attorney approached and asked Officer Santiago a series of questions designed to create doubt about what the 911 call really proved. Officer Santiago, are you a psychologist? No, I'm not. Are you trained in assessing someone's mental state based on their voice? I have training in recognizing certain crisis indicators, but I'm not a mental health professional. Is it possible for someone to sound calm, even while experiencing extreme internal distress? Yes, people respond to stress differently. Is it possible for someone to be in shock and not realize the full impact of what they've just done? I suppose that's possible. The defense was trying to undermine the significance of Tyler's calm demeanor. Yes, he sounded calm. But does that definitively prove anything about his intent? Or could there be other explanations for why someone might sound calm after a traumatic event? Officer Santiago was excused. The prosecution called their next witness, Corporal Joshua Stanford. Corporal Stanford testified about responding to the scene. He described arriving at the residence on Northridge Drive at approximately 6:35 p.m. He described approaching the house and having the door opened by a young girl, one of Ashley's daughters. The girl told him, "My mother is in the bedroom." Corporal Stanford described entering the residence, locating the master bedroom, finding the bathroom with the locked door, gaining entry, and finding Ashley Fish deceased. He testified about checking for vital signs and determining that she had already passed. He described securing the scene and calling for additional resources. He testified about ensuring the 4 children in the house were safe and separated from the scene. The prosecutor asked about the weapon. Corporal Stanford confirmed that they found the firearm Tyler had mentioned. He confirmed that the magazine had been removed, exactly as Tyler had stated. He testified about the weapon being collected as evidence. The defense cross-examined briefly, but didn't significantly challenge Corporal Stanford's testimony. The facts were the facts. Ashley had been found deceased in the bathroom. The weapon was there with the magazine removed. 4 children were in the house. These weren't disputed. The prosecution then called a series of expert witnesses. A crime scene investigator testified about processing the residence, about photographing everything, about documenting the scene in detail, about collecting evidence according to proper protocols. A firearms expert testified about the weapon, about what type it was, how it functions, what ammunition it used, about the fact that the magazine had been removed and was found separate from the weapon, about testing the weapon to confirm it was the one that had been fired, A medical examiner testified about the autopsy conducted on Ashley Fish's remains, about the cause of death, about the injuries sustained, about the medical timeline of events. This testimony was clinical and detailed, necessarily so to prove the elements of the crime, but also difficult for Ashley's family to hear. The prosecution was building a comprehensive evidentiary record. They were showing that every detail Tyler mentioned in the 911 call was accurate, that the physical evidence supported his confession, that there was no doubt about what had occurred. Then the prosecution called Mr. Fish, the father of Ashley's 4 daughters. Mr. Fish took the stand and testified about his relationship with Ashley, about their 4 daughters together, about the co-parenting arrangement they had maintained after their romantic relationship ended. The prosecutor asked about April 7, 2022. Mr. Fish testified about receiving a text message from Ashley at 5:50 p.m. He read the message aloud for the jury. "I'll have the girls call soon, trying to do dinner and stuff. I guess call when you're ready later. I'm still working on my situation here." That was the last communication he received from Ashley, he testified. She never called later. The girls never called. The next day, he learned that Ashley had been killed. The prosecutor asked Mr. Fish to explain what he understood my situation to mean at the time. Mr. Fish said he didn't know. The message seemed normal. He thought she was just dealing with regular evening activities with the children. The defense cross-examined, but gently. There wasn't much to challenge in Mr. Fish's testimony. He'd received a text message. It said what it said. He had interpreted it as normal at the time. These were just facts. Then came perhaps the most emotional testimony of the trial. The prosecution called Sheila Krebsbach, Ashley's mother. Mrs. Krebsbach took the stand. She was visibly emotional but composed. She was there to tell the jury about her daughter, to make sure they saw Ashley as a real person, not just a name in a legal case. The prosecutor asked her to describe Ashley. Mrs. Krebsbach talked about her daughter as a mother, as someone who put her children first in everything, who was active in their lives, who loved them deeply, who was devoted to giving them the best life she could. The prosecutor asked about Ashley's character, Mrs. Krebsbach stated clearly and emphatically, "I never knew my daughter to be aggressive or physically violent." This testimony was critical. It countered any suggestion that there might have been mutual combat or that Ashley had been an aggressor in whatever confrontation preceded the shooting. According to her own mother, who knew her for her entire life, Ashley was not a violent person. The prosecutor asked about Tyler Derekowski. Mrs. Krebsbach explained that she knew Ashley was in a relationship with Tyler. She visited the house and saw him there, but they didn't interact much. Tyler remained somewhat separate when she visited. "Did you ever witness any violence or conflict between Ashley and Tyler?" "No," Mrs. Krebsbach testified. She never saw anything that concerned her. She had no reason to think her daughter was in danger. The defense cross-examined gently. You don't want to appear to be attacking a grieving mother in front of a jury. The defense asked about how often she visited, what she observed, whether she and Tyler spoke much. But they didn't challenge the core of her testimony. Mrs. Krebsbach was excused. The prosecution rested their case. They had presented the 911 confession, the responding officer's testimony, the physical evidence, the expert witnesses, the context about who Ashley was. They had built a comprehensive case for second-degree murder with specific intent. Now it was the defense's turn to present their case. The defense faced a significant challenge. Their client had confessed on tape. The physical evidence supported that confession. The prosecution had presented strong evidence. The defense's strategy focused on the element of specific intent, on creating doubt about whether the prosecution had really proven that Tyler consciously desired to bring about Ashley's death. The defense called Zygmunt Derekowski, Tyler's adoptive father, Mr. Derekowski testified about adopting Tyler when he was 4 years old, about raising him, about his life and background. The defense was trying to humanize Tyler, to make the jury see him as more than just a defendant, as a person with a history and a family. But there's only so much this kind of testimony can accomplish. The question isn't whether Tyler had a difficult childhood or whether he's a sympathetic figure. The question is whether he committed second-degree murder with specific intent. The defense may have called other witnesses, though the complete record isn't fully public. They may have presented expert testimony about trauma responses or about how people in shock might behave. They were trying to create doubt about whether Tyler's actions definitively proved specific intent. But ultimately, the defense's case came down to one core argument. The prosecution hasn't proven specific intent beyond a reasonable doubt. Yes, Tyler shot Ashley. Yes, she died. But has the prosecution really proven what was in his mind at the moment he pulled the trigger? After both sides had presented all their evidence, it was time for closing arguments. This was each side's final opportunity to address the jury, to summarize the evidence, to explain why the jury should rule in their favor. The prosecution went first. The prosecutor stood before the jury and reviewed all the evidence they'd heard. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard all the evidence. You've listened to that 911 call multiple times. You've heard from the officers who responded. You've seen the physical evidence. You've heard from Ashley's family. The evidence is clear and overwhelming. Tyler Derechowski shot Ashley Fish. He admitted it. There's no dispute about that. The question is specific intent. Did Tyler consciously desire to bring about Ashley's death or to cause her great bodily harm? Look at his actions. These are the actions of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. He unloaded the weapon after shooting Ashley. That's not panic. That's presence of mind. That's someone calm enough to remember firearm safety and to execute it correctly. He left the scene. He didn't stay with Ashley. He didn't check on her. He didn't try to help her. He left the house and drove to another location. He waited to call 911. He didn't call immediately. He took time. He traveled away from the scene, and then he called to turn himself in. When he did call, he didn't request medical help. He didn't ask for an ambulance. He didn't express concern about whether Ashley could be saved. He said he thought she was dead and he hadn't checked on her. All of this demonstrates specific intent. Tyler shot Ashley with the intent to cause her death. He believed he had succeeded, and he made no effort to save her because that wasn't his goal. The defense wants you to think that maybe Tyler was in shock. Maybe he was confused. Maybe he didn't really know what he was doing. But someone in shock doesn't methodically unload a weapon. Someone in confusion doesn't calmly call 911 and provide detailed information. Someone who doesn't know what they're doing doesn't accurately describe the scene and where evidence will be found. Tyler knew exactly what he'd done, and the evidence proves it beyond any reasonable doubt. Think about those 4 daughters. Think about the oldest one who had to open the door for police and say, "My mother is in the bedroom." Think about those girls growing up without their mother because of Tyler Derechowski's choice. Justice for Ashley Fish requires you to hold Tyler Derechowski accountable. The evidence proves beyond a reasonable doubt that he shot her with specific intent. You must find him guilty of second-degree murder. The prosecution sat down. Now the defense gave their closing argument. Ladies and gentlemen, the prosecution just told you that this is a clear case, that the evidence proves specific intent beyond any doubt, that you must convict. But that's not true. There is doubt, and your job is to carefully consider whether that doubt is reasonable. This is a tragedy. Ashley Fish's death is heartbreaking. 4 children losing their mother is devastating. No one disputes that. But your job isn't to punish Tyler for that tragedy. Your job is to determine whether the prosecution has proven every element of second-degree murder beyond a reasonable doubt. The prosecution must prove specific intent. They must prove that Tyler consciously desired to cause Ashley's death or great bodily harm. That's a very specific mental state that they have to prove existed at a specific moment in time. Can they really do that? Can they prove what was in Tyler's mind when he pulled that trigger? They point to his actions afterward, to the fact that he unloaded the weapon, to the fact that he left the scene, to the fact that he sounded calm on the 911 call. But do those things definitively prove specific intent at the moment of the shooting? Or could there be other explanations? People respond to trauma in different ways. Someone in shock might perform automatic actions like unloading a weapon without conscious thought. Someone dissociating might sound calm while internally experiencing chaos. Someone overwhelmed might make choices that don't make sense to outside observers. The prosecution hasn't proven, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Tyler had specific intent. They've shown that he committed an act with a terrible result, but they haven't proven what was in his mind when he committed that act. If you have doubt about specific intent, and you should, then you must follow the law. You must return a not guilty verdict. This doesn't mean you think what happened is okay. It doesn't mean you don't feel sympathy for Ashley's family. It means you're following the law. You're holding the prosecution to their burden of proof, and when they fail to meet that burden, you must find the defendant not guilty. The defense sat down. Closing arguments were complete. The judge then instructed the jury on the law. The judge explained what second-degree murder means under Louisiana law, what specific intent means, what the prosecution's burden of proof is, what reasonable doubt means, what the jury's responsibilities are. The jury was told that they must be unanimous. All 12 must agree on the verdict. If even one juror has reasonable doubt, they cannot convict. The jury was given written instructions to take with them into deliberations. They were told they could review any evidence they wanted. They could ask to hear the 911 call again. They could look at photographs. They could review testimony transcripts. The jury retired to the deliberation room. 12 people who had sat through days of testimony now had to make a decision that would affect multiple lives forever. In that room, they discussed the case. They reviewed the evidence. They debated what specific intent means and whether it had been proven. They listened to the 911 call again, probably multiple times. They looked at the timeline. They considered the testimony. Some jurors might have been convinced of guilt immediately. Others might have had doubts. They had to talk through those doubts. They had to work toward unanimity. They had to be sure. The deliberations took hours. This wasn't a quick decision. The jurors took their responsibility seriously. They carefully considered all the evidence. And finally, they reached a verdict. All 12 agreed. They had unanimously determined whether the prosecution had proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt. The jury sent word to the judge that they had reached a decision. The courtroom was reconvened. The defendant was brought in. The families took their seats. The judge, the attorneys, everyone assembled for the reading of the verdict. The moment that had been building for nearly 2 years had arrived. The judge asked the jury foreman if they had reached a unanimous verdict on the charge of second-degree murder. "Yes, Your Honor," the foreman replied. The judge asked for the verdict form. The bailiff retrieved it from the foreman and handed it to the judge. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Everyone waited. The judge read the verdict. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Tyler Neal Darakowski, guilty of second-degree murder. Guilty." Ashley's family reacted with emotion. Some cried, some embraced. There was a sense of relief that justice had been served, though that justice could never bring Ashley back. Tyler showed little visible reaction. He had just been convicted of a crime that carried a mandatory life sentence. His fate was sealed. The defense requested that the jury be polled. This means asking each juror individually if this is their verdict. Each of the 12 jurors confirmed, "Yes, this is my verdict. Yes, I find the defendant guilty." The verdict was unanimous. 12 people had agreed that the prosecution proved its case beyond a reasonable doubt, that Tyler Darakowski had specific intent when he shot Ashley Fish, that he was guilty of second-degree murder. The judge thanked the jury for their service and dismissed them. Their job was done. They had fulfilled their civic duty. They had carefully considered the evidence and reached a unanimous decision. But the trial wasn't quite over. There was still sentencing. In Louisiana, for second-degree murder, the sentence is mandatory and specified by law. There's no sentencing hearing where both sides argue for different outcomes. There's no discretion for the judge to impose a lesser sentence. The law specifies exactly what the sentence must be. Life in prison at hard labor, without the possibility of parole, probation, or suspension of sentence. This means Tyler Darakowski would spend the rest of his natural life in prison. He would never be eligible for parole. He would never have a chance to petition for release. He would never walk outside prison walls as a free man. He would die in prison. On March 22, 2024, the judge formally imposed this mandatory sentence. Tyler Neal Darakowski is hereby sentenced to life in prison at hard labor without the possibility of parole, probation, or suspension of sentence for the crime of second-degree murder. The legal process was complete. Tyler had been convicted. He had been sentenced. He would be transported to a Louisiana state prison to begin serving his life sentence. After the sentencing, Beauregard Parish District Attorney Jimmy Lestage made a public statement about the case. "This case is extremely tragic," Lestage said. "4 young children are left to grow up without their mother because of the actions of this man. I hope the knowledge that he will be sentenced to serve out his natural life in prison brings some closure for them and for the rest of Ashley's family." Closure. That word again. The idea that a verdict and sentence somehow provide closure, that they allow a family to move on, that they represent an ending. But can there really be closure when a mother is gone? When 4 daughters will grow up without her? When every birthday, every holiday, every milestone will be marked by her absence? The legal case is closed. The investigation is complete. The trial is over. The verdict has been reached. The sentence has been imposed. In the eyes of the law, justice has been served. Tyler Darakowski has been held accountable for his actions. He will spend the rest of his life paying the price for what he did on April 7th, 2022. He will never be free. He will never have another chance to hurt anyone. But for Ashley's daughters, the sentence is different. They're sentenced to a lifetime without their mother. They're sentenced to growing up with this trauma. They're sentenced to explaining to friends why they don't have a mom. They're sentenced to walking down the aisle at their weddings without their mother there. They're sentenced to raising their own children someday without their mother's guidance. That's the real sentence. And it lasts a lifetime. Today, as of this documentary, Tyler Derechowski sits in a Louisiana State Correctional Facility. He's in his mid-30s. He has decades ahead of him. Decades of waking up in a cell, decades of prison routine, decades of living with what he did, decades of knowing he'll never be free. Prison life is hard, especially for someone serving life without parole. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. There's no possibility of release. There's nothing to work toward except surviving each day. Tyler will age in prison. He'll watch years pass. He'll see other inmates come and go. He'll miss everything that happens in the outside world. He'll never attend a family gathering again. He'll never have a normal conversation with someone who isn't an inmate or a guard. He'll never make choices about his own life again. This is the consequence of his actions. This is what he chose when he chose violence on April 7th, 2022. Ashley's 4 daughters are being raised by family members who love them. The exact arrangements remain private to protect the children, but they're in a stable, loving environment. They're getting the counseling and support they need. They're attending school. They're participating in activities. They're learning to live with their loss. The oldest daughter carries memories that will last forever. She remembers her mother. She remembers that day. She remembers opening the door for police. She'll carry all of that for the rest of her life. But she's also resilient. Children are remarkably resilient. With proper support, with love, with therapy and stability, children can heal from even severe trauma. They can build meaningful lives. They can find happiness again. It doesn't mean the loss ever goes away. It doesn't mean they'll ever stop missing their mother. But it means they can move forward. They can honor their mother's memory by living well. The younger daughters also have their challenges. They were so young when this happened. Their memories of their mother may fade over time, which is both a blessing and a curse. They'll have photographs and videos to show them who their mother was. They'll have family members who can tell them stories, but they won't have their own clear memories of her. They'll grow up hearing about their mother, about how much she loved them, about what happened to her, about the fact that their father figure, Tyler, was the one who took her from them. That's a complicated thing for children to process. The person who lived in their house, who was part of their daily life, killed their mother. How do you make sense of that as a child? They'll need ongoing therapy. They'll need patient caregivers who can answer their questions as they mature and are able to understand more. They'll need support as they navigate the complex emotions that come with this kind of loss. Ashley's mother, Sheila Krebsbach, has lost her daughter. That's a pain that never fully heals. Losing a child is one of the most devastating experiences a parent can endure. And Mrs. Krebsbach not only lost her daughter, but lost her to violence, lost her knowing that someone chose to take her life. Mrs. Krebsbach now has the responsibility of helping her granddaughters cope with their loss while managing her own grief. She testified at trial, which meant reliving the worst day of her life in front of strangers. But she did it because she wanted justice for Ashley. Because she wanted the jury to see Ashley as a real person, not just as a victim in a case. The extended family also grieves. Aunts and uncles, cousins, friends, everyone who knew Ashley and loved her. Everyone who watched her daughters grow up. Everyone who's now helping raise those daughters and trying to fill the unfillable hole left by Ashley's absence. Tyler's family faces their own challenges. Zygmunt Derechowski testified at his son's trial. He adopted Tyler when Tyler was 4 years old. He raised him. He loved him. And now he has to reconcile the person he thought he knew with what Tyler did. Tyler's family didn't commit any crime. They didn't hurt anyone, but they carry the weight of what Tyler did. They face judgment from others who know their son is in prison for murder. They grapple with questions about whether they could have done something differently. Families of people who commit serious crimes often experience a particular kind of grief. They've lost their loved one, not to death, but to prison. They carry guilt and shame even though they're not responsible for the crime. They're often isolated because people don't know how to talk to them about what happened. The community of DeRidder has also been affected. In small towns, these kinds of tragedies reverberate through the entire community. People knew Ashley or knew of her. People knew Tyler or knew of him. The daughters went to school with other children whose parents now have to explain what happened. There were likely vigils and memorials for Ashley, community support for the family, conversations about domestic violence and how to recognize warning signs, discussions about how something like this could happen. Small towns tend to pull together in times of tragedy, but they also remember. The house on Northridge Drive is still there. People drive by it and remember what happened there. The case left a mark on the community that won't soon fade. This case also had broader implications beyond just this one family and this one community. It became part of the public conversation about domestic violence. Domestic violence is a pervasive problem in the United States and around the world. According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, intimate partner violence accounts for 15% of all violent crime in the United States. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men experience severe intimate partner physical violence. These statistics represent real people, real families, real lives affected by violence. Ashley Fish became one of those statistics on April 7, 2022. The case also highlighted some important realities about domestic violence that people need to understand. First, domestic violence doesn't always show visible warning signs. There were no prior police reports involving Ashley and Tyler, no documented incidents, no complaints from neighbors, and yet violence occurred with fatal consequences. This is not unusual. Many domestic violence situations don't become visible until it's too late. The abuse happens behind closed doors. Victims hide injuries or minimize problems. Perpetrators control the narrative and present a normal face to the world. Second, escalation can happen quickly. Whatever the dynamics in Ashley and Tyler's relationship, things went from Ashley texting about dinner at 5:50 p.m. to a fatal shooting by 6:20 p.m., 30 minutes. That's how fast a situation can deteriorate. This rapid escalation is actually common in domestic homicides. There may be underlying tension or control issues, but the actual fatal violence can erupt suddenly. It doesn't necessarily require a long history of escalating physical abuse. Sometimes the first incident of physical violence is also the fatal incident. Third, the presence of children doesn't prevent domestic violence. 4 daughters were in that house on April 7th. Tyler knew they were there. He acknowledged it on the 911 call, but their presence didn't stop the violence. This is an important reality. Many people assume that someone wouldn't commit violence when children are present, but domestic violence occurs in homes with children all the time, and those children are deeply traumatized by what they witness or experience. Fourth, weapons in the home can become weapons against family members. Ashley and Mr. Fish purchased that gun for protection. It was legal and registered. It was supposed to keep Ashley safe. Instead, it became the weapon used against her. Statistics show that the presence of a gun in a domestic violence situation increases the risk of homicide by 500%. This doesn't mean people shouldn't be allowed to own firearms. It means we need to be realistic about the risks, especially in situations where there might be relationship conflict. Fifth, domestic violence can affect anyone. Ashley was a mother, a daughter, a community member. She had a job, she had friends, she had a life. She wasn't a stereotype. She was a real person, and domestic violence entered her life and destroyed it. This is crucial to understand. Domestic violence doesn't only happen to certain types of people, it crosses all demographics. It affects people of different races, economic backgrounds, education levels, and social classes. No one is immune. The Ashley Fish case also raises important questions about prevention. Could anything have prevented this tragedy? Were there intervention points that were missed? What systems need to be in place to better protect potential victims? These are difficult questions without easy answers. Even with the best systems in place, we cannot prevent every tragedy, because ultimately, violence is a choice made by individuals, and we cannot control or predict every individual choice, but we can work to create better systems. We can reduce stigma around admitting relationship problems. We can educate people about healthy versus unhealthy relationship dynamics. We can make resources more accessible. We can train professionals who interact with families to recognize warning signs. We can hold perpetrators accountable. Warning signs of potentially abusive or dangerous relationships include extreme jealousy or possessiveness, controlling behavior including monitoring communications or movements, isolation from friends and family, verbal abuse or constant criticism, blaming the victim for the abuser's actions or emotions, threats during arguments even if they seem like jokes, destruction of property, violence toward pets, and unpredictable mood swings. Not every relationship that includes some of these signs will become physically violent, and not every violent relationship displays all these signs. But these are patterns that experts recognize as concerning and that warrant attention. If you recognize these patterns in your own relationship, please reach out for help. The National Domestic Violence Hotline operates 24/7 at 1-800-799-7233. You can also text START to 88788 or visit thehotline.org. These services are confidential, free, and staffed by trained advocates who can help you assess your situation and make a safety plan. If you're concerned about someone else, you can also call the hotline for guidance on how to approach the situation, how to offer support without judgment, how to help someone access resources when they're ready. It's important to understand that leaving an abusive relationship is often the most dangerous time. The period when a victim is trying to leave or has just left is when the risk of fatal violence is highest. This is why safety planning is so critical, why victims need support from trained professionals, why we can't just tell someone to just leave without understanding the very real dangers involved. Resources are available, help exists, but people have to know about these resources and feel safe accessing them. That's why awareness is so important. That's why cases like Ashley Fish's, tragic as they are, can serve an educational purpose. Ashley Fish's legacy is complex. She didn't choose to become a symbol or a cautionary tale. She was just living her life, raising her daughters, trying to navigate the complexities of relationships and parenthood. But her story can help others. It can raise awareness about domestic violence. It can encourage people to pay attention to warning signs. It can inspire people to reach out for help if they're in a dangerous situation. It can motivate communities to provide better resources and support for victims. Most importantly, Ashley's legacy is her 4 daughters. They carry her memory. They embody the love she gave them and the time she had with them. They are survivors who will grow up to live their own lives, shaped by what happened but not defined solely by it. Those daughters deserve to know that their mother loved them, that she did her best for them, that what happened to her was not her fault and certainly wasn't their fault, that she would want them to live full, happy, meaningful lives. They deserve to grow up in a world that takes domestic violence seriously, that provides resources for victims, that holds perpetrators accountable, that works to prevent future tragedies. Tyler Derechowski's legacy is very different. He will be remembered as the man who killed Ashley Fish, who left 4 children without a mother, who made a choice on April 7, 2022, that destroyed multiple lives, including his own. He has decades ahead of him to reflect on that choice, to live with the knowledge of what he did, to understand the full scope of harm he caused. He will never be free. He will never have the opportunity to make amends. He can only survive and accept the consequences of his actions. The trial provided legal accountability. Justice, in the narrow legal sense, was served. Tyler was convicted by a jury of his peers. He was sentenced according to law. He is being punished for his crime. But legal justice cannot undo harm. It cannot bring Ashley back. It cannot give those daughters their mother back. It cannot erase trauma or restore what was lost. It can only hold someone accountable and remove them from society so they cannot cause further harm. This case is closed. The investigation is complete. The trial is over. The appeals, if any, will wind their way through the courts. But the legal proceedings are essentially finished. Yet the impact continues. 4 daughters continue to grow up without their mother. 2 families continue to cope with profound loss. A community continues to remember and process what happened. And hopefully some people who hear this story will learn from it, will recognize warning signs in their own lives or the lives of people they know, will reach out for help or offer support, will take domestic violence seriously as the public health crisis that it is. That's the best we can hope for from tragedy, that it teaches us, that it motivates us to do better, that it saves even one life that might otherwise have been lost. If you've watched this entire documentary, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to understand this case comprehensively, for learning about Ashley's life, not just her death, for sitting with difficult truths about domestic violence, for staying engaged with a challenging subject. If this case has affected you, if it's made you think about relationships or violence or justice, please consider taking action. Check in with friends and family. Listen without judgment if someone shares concerns about their relationship. Share information about resources like the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Take warning signs seriously. And if you're experiencing domestic violence yourself, please know that you deserve to be safe. You deserve to live without fear. Resources are available. People want to help. You are not alone. This has been the complete documentary on the Ashley Fish case. We've covered her life, the events of April 7th, 2022, the investigation, the trial, the verdict, and the aftermath. We've examined what this case teaches us about domestic violence, justice, and the lasting impact of violence on families and communities. Ashley Fish was a real person, a mother who loved her 4 daughters, a daughter whose mother loved her, someone who mattered to the people who knew her. She deserves to be remembered as more than just a victim in a true crime story. She deserves to be remembered as Ashley, a person whose life had value and meaning. Her daughters will grow up with her memory. They'll be told stories about her. They'll see photographs and videos. They'll know that their mother loved them and wanted the best for them. And hopefully they'll heal and build good lives that honor her memory. Tyler Derechowski made a choice that he can never undo. He took a life. He destroyed a family. He traumatized children. He will spend the rest of his life paying the price for that choice. That's justice under our legal system. It's accountability. It's the consequence of his actions. But it doesn't bring Ashley back. It doesn't undo the harm. It doesn't restore what was lost. It can only ensure that Tyler cannot hurt anyone else and that he faces consequences for what he did. The legal case is closed, but Ashley's story continues through her daughters, through the people who remember her, and through the lessons we can learn from this tragedy. May Ashley rest in peace. May her daughters find healing and build beautiful lives. May her family find whatever measure of peace is possible after such devastating loss. And may her story help protect others from similar tragedies. Thank you for watching this comprehensive documentary. If it helped you understand domestic violence or the criminal justice system better, please consider subscribing to support educational content. Share this video to raise awareness. And please reach out for help if you or someone you know needs it. Domestic violence is preventable. Lives can be saved, families can be protected, but only if we all pay attention, take it seriously, and support those who need help. That's Ashley Fish's legacy. That's what we can learn from her story. And that's how we can honor her memory.